Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I
Uh,
was curious, do you do any birch tapping? Any birch sap?
I don't have a lot of birch trees where I live, but we have walnuts we tap, walnuts and butternuts.
Oh,
Um,
butternut. Wow.
and I was really surprised because I have a friend who's got like 15 or 20. So we tapped them all and then we boiled the maple sap and the walnut sap separately, thinking that they would taste different. And because I mean, you would expect that, right? They didn't
Yeah.
taste different at all. They were exact. So I
Really?
haven't had a chance to try the birch yet because I don't have big birches.
Okay.
My parents have some way down in their woods, but I'd have to get over there and it would be difficult to do. And the other thing is I've tapped birches before at friends' properties, but I think the timing is different for them and I haven't figured it out.
That's what I was wondering if the temperature might be different because of their cycle.
I think that they're later than the maples. The maples are actually like as soon as it goes above freezing, they start flowing. And they actually seem to flow really well, like like in the 10 or 12 degrees above freezing. Like today it's really right at freezing and I've got probably a half a gallon to three-quarters of a gallon, which of course is another term. Let's say like a liter and a half per day, which is a lot. So yeah.
Yeah. Does the one more question about birch? Would that be yellow birch that you would call
Black birch for us.
black? Okay.
Betulolenta.
Okay, gotcha.
We have like the Allegheny black birch. We do have the yellow birch as well. We have less of those. There's a yellow birch and there's a black birch. Those are the two we have. We don't have the white birch quite down this far.
The yellows, they're the ones that get really big a little north of us, like in Algonquin around Lake Huron. They live to be like 200. They're really big
Are
trees.
they the ones when you say yellow birch, you mean the ones with the really curly bark?
Yeah, as they mature, especially, they'll get like a gnarled bottom that looks nothing like a white birch. It has like furrowed bark and everything.
Yeah, Betula allegrensis. Is that the one we're talking about?
I
Okay.
think so. I'm not amazing with Latin names, but I think so.
Well, what I have found is when I talk to people in different regions, I have to actually use the Latin names because we all have different folk names and they're not the same. So that's why I said Betula lenta. That's the sweet birch, which I don't know if it grows. I don't know how far north it grows. Where exactly are you?
I'm in southern Ontario, so I'm just a little bit south of Detroit in that little place that juts down into the United States.
I used to be so close to there because I was actually north of Detroit, like kind of in between Detroit and Flint. I was there for probably like 6 years. That's where I learned permaculture. There's like a huge permaculture scene out there.
I didn't know that. I actually haven't been over the border that side.
Look into the Detroit permaculture meetup. That
Okay.
group is a group I helped found and they've been going strong for like 15 years now and they do different meetings once a month all over Detroit. So if it's close in the city, you could potentially cross the border pretty easily and go visit.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I'll have to look into
Really
that.
good group of people doing really great things.
Wow.
Cool. Yeah, so I know exactly where you are and I know what your climate's like. I've
Oh,
actually
yeah.
been across the Sarnia Bridge, so
Oh, I haven't been to that one either yet.
yeah. Okay, cool. Well, why don't we start by having you just introduce yourself and describing your connection to gardening, regenerative agriculture, permaculture, and those sorts of things.
Sure. So I'm Gavin Mounsey, and my introduction to gardening was my parents. They had an orchard out west in the Okanagan. Before that, actually, I should start with that because that started my love of nature and gardening. They were park rangers out in the West Coast in Whistler. So I was already always out in the woods with them when they were taking care of the trails and the campsites. And I developed a deep connection with the trees and with nature there. And I was always looking to learn more about how ecosystems work. And then when we moved to the Okanagan, it became the livelihood to tend the earth, to cultivate things. And so they were growing apples and grapes and some ground crops and some soft fruit. And so they were doing it conventionally, but they had amazing soil. So everyone was really impressed with the quality of the fruit. I was blown away by like eating a cherry off of a tree for the first time versus the ones that are in the store, probably shipped here from New Zealand or somewhere, for 3 weeks. And I was like, wow, that's real flavor. But when I grew a little bit of my own garden there as a young guy, there was a block of grapes that had died off in a hard frost, and I ended up planting organic tomatoes and a couple different crops in a polyculture there. And I experimented with doing organic versus the conventional. So I used like kelp meal as a fertilizer instead of using the synthetic NPK. And I noticed the flavor and the resilience of those crops was way beyond what was being grown in the conventional next door. And there was like farmers who had been doing it for decades were coming over and looking at my patch of tomatoes, and there was no blossom end rot on the tomatoes. And they were like, how did you do that? Like, but no, it's the kelp, it's the full nutrition you get from organic fertilizer. So
Hmm.
that really got me sold on it. And then I started gardening, and a few years down the road, I met my now wife, and we moved out to Ontario. And then I took a permaculture course because I wanted to enhance my kind of ability to do it on a residential scale and to really learn from nature like I did when I was a kid, but to apply it in the garden.
Yeah.
Um, so I started off with that. And then basically I found that there was so much ancient knowledge that hadn't been passed on to our generation that permaculture was tugging at the threads of.
Mhm.
They were looking to the indigenous worldview of the seventh generation of future care or fair share, and
Mhm.
they're looking to look at biomimicry and to think about how our way we grow food impacts the earth as well as our human communities. So I branched off from permaculture into learning about ancient regenerative techniques that are from like the indigenous people from where I live here. And now I'm starting to learn a little bit about like Gaelic culture and how they had ethno-ecological worldviews like the Brehon laws and stuff like that. And I'm trying to tie it all together into a vision that carries towards the ancient wisdom forward, but supported with modern science. And so
Mhm.
that's what my book was, the culmination of Recipes for Reciprocity.
Mhm.
It was to give people a trail map where they could go all the way from a handful of seeds to an amazing harvest. And in the process, also learn about nature, give back to the soil, and
Mhm.
then perpetuate the process through seed saving and do some creativity in the kitchen too, because I've always loved cooking.
Yeah, yeah. Awesome. That I mean, I've taken a look at your work and I've been following you for a while, and it's really I really am impressed in the ways that you've taken some of the concepts like, permaculture or regenerative ag and really put, I guess, a more yeah, and like a re-indigenized spin on them, I guess, and I feel like I root myself in a really similar place. Like I started with learning permaculture, and then for the last 6 years I've been studying with an Indigenous woman in Ontario, and it's really completely changed my worldview, even towards permaculture, right? So, I've always felt like I was a good steward, but recognizing like the sovereignty of all beings and really leaning into some of those concepts that are not present in permaculture. Like permaculture, it's like I can go to a ruined landscape and I can use these techniques and I can regenerate this place, and that's awesome. But there's so much more. Like that's just scratching the surface. That's just like, okay, but be a good human. But how do I actually be a good human? How am I an equal partner in this ecosystem, and how am I not better, and moving into that like biocentric worldview and things like that. So I totally feel like you and I are on really parallel paths. So it's really nice to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay, so do you use the term regenerative to describe your practices, or is there a better term?
Yeah, I do. Some throughout my book, I hadn't really been exposed to that much of the literature and concepts of regenerative, so I would use the word sustainable.
Mhm.
But I find that there's been a lot of like, I don't know, I guess you call it greenwashing with the word sustainable.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, where there's been like these corporations and NGOs and whatnot, and they're kind of glomming onto the word and
Mhm.
using it as kind of a thing to like people who care about the earth. They want to get them to sign on board with whatever their thing is, so they use the word, but they're not necessarily practicing, ecological values. So I've moved over to regenerative because for me, regenerative, there might be a better word, I haven't come across it yet, but regenerative is going a step beyond just organic and beyond just sustaining what we've already been gifted in our lives, and to actually give back to the earth to build the resilience of the ecology where we live and then to give it on to future generations.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I like that term. Yeah, I love that definition you offered too. So yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about your work in the world and how it ties to this concept of regeneration?
Sure. So let's see, I wrote down a couple things so I can
Sure.
remember.
Yeah, I know you got a lot going on, so.
So yeah, I did my book and then I got really big into seed saving. So I started to try to source out both varieties that are bioregionally, uh, culturally important to the indigenous people here,
Mhm.
and create basically building on your idea, the refugia idea.
Mhm.
So I had already been kind of intuitively gathering species of trees and plants that are endangered in the forest habitat here in the native habitat, but I
Mhm.
wanted to add on culturally important heirlooms
Mhm.
because those ones have been tended for, centuries or even millennia to be
Mhm.
really well acclimatized to an area, and they offer so much more vibrance and color and often nutrition.
Mhm.
So that became a big part of my path in permaculture design and regenerative garden design to gather those seeds, to propagate them out, to have like a seed bank in my own little plot, and
Mhm.
then to provide them to people. I often actually will send packages of these seeds with the book each time people buy a book. So they've
Mhm.
got their own little refugia of living embryos to start from, and they can create their own refugia in their yard and then scale it
Love
up
that.
into their.
We should definitely we had talked about before doing a trade. We should do a trade this year for sure.
Yeah, I'd love that.
Especially because as the climate is warming, I'm slightly south of you, so I might have some species that would really acclimate well to a slightly colder climate because it's not colder anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's
In
interesting.
American hazelnut and spice bush and some of those sorts of folks that I've got here. So black birch you might be interested in.
Definitely. I just started some sweet spice shrub seeds I got from my Canadian company, so I'm trying to get
Yeah,
on that.
yeah. I've got we have abundant spice bush here. That's Lindera benzoin. So that might be something you'd be really interested in because that's growing extensively south of you. So that's part of what I've been thinking about is not just what's growing where I'm at now, but what's growing like 2 or 3 hours south so that as the climate warms, I can help. So for example, pawpaw is not native where I live.
Okay.
We're on the border. It's about if I drive 2 hours south and I go kayaking on any river, it's everywhere. But where I live, because I'm higher up in the mountains, it's still colder and the pawpaw isn't there. So I'm propagating pawpaw here because it's getting warmer every year. So that pawpaw's going to love living by my little stream. You know what I mean? So that's
Yeah,
part of the way that I'm sort of thinking not only about like refugia, but also about how the shifts in climate are going to require us to like think in different ways, you know? Um,
that's
so,
great. Another thing that made me think of is I've also been looking at climate analogs on different continents.
mm,
Of course, I try to assess like a species whether its capability to outcompete natives if I'm going to introduce it in a non-controlled way. But I try to do like what Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about in her books in looking at us as a democracy of species versus a democracy of humans.
yeah.
So if I introduce a herb into my garden or a tree that's from another climate, let's say the wild apples from Kazakhstan, which I managed to get seeds from, I'll observe it growing there and see how the local insect ecology interacts with the tree and see how it's going on with growing with native plants. And then after doing an assess, then I might include it in my designs after that. So I'm trying to
Mm,
do also climate analogs, especially with endangered species like the Kazakhstan apple and
mhm.
others that I can try to incorporate in there too.
Yeah, that's really cool. Okay, so we've got your book, and then you've got all your social media, which you didn't
Yep.
really talk about, and then you've got your design and your seed saving and your
Yep.
refugia. Is that all of it?
Well, no, I do like talks. So I just I know was it last night? No, it was the night before. I went to a group. They have like an alternative holistic medicine clinic. So
Hmm.
they do different things there, whether it's like supplements for addressing certain issues or Reiki and that kind of thing. And they invited me to speak there about my book and my path to help people to get food sovereignty. So I like connecting the dots with places like that where they might be looking at the health aspect of all natural, but they're not necessarily connecting it right back to the earth. And
Yeah.
they're just buying from places that might be shipping from China or something. And so I'm trying to get them to connect that passion they have for health right onto the land where they live. And
Hmm.
so there's that reciprocal cycle going on of them appreciating what's natural and also giving back to it. And so
Yeah.
that's been really great to see because a lot of people are excited. I share seeds, I gift seeds and try to do some gift economics. And they plant them in their yards and start their own little process of getting some of the medicine they would have bought from companies.
Hmm.
And then I also try to do the connection to conventional agricultural groups that they don't really understand the benefits of switching to nourishing the soil versus just tilling and synthetically fertilizing the soil. So I'll go
Hmm.
to like local horticultural meetings and speak there. And it's a lot of the old timers that have been farming with the big tractors for a long time and try to gently introduce some metrics, some success stories, and just give them an idea of how much more successful they can be if they team up with nature versus having this adversarial relationship with nature.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, yeah. Around here, I've actually found I tried to like start another permaculture meetup, like I had started in Detroit with some friends, and it just like fell flat. Nobody was interested. It just wasn't
Oh,
where people were. And so then I started doing plant walks, and I quickly realized that the way in to a really rural, really conservative community, which is where I live, it's almost like you just have to figure out what language they speak.
yeah.
So like the permaculture, regenerative agriculture, sustainability, like nobody wanted to hear that at all. That was
Oh,
not of interest. I mean, I had maybe like two or three people that were doing it. I mean, I know everyone who's doing permaculture in my county, like we all
yeah.
talk, but to reach sort of a larger group, I ended up doing plant walks and eventually started an herb school where we focus on regenerative like interactions and reciprocal interactions with the earth. And we do all like local actually like a lot of opportunistic species medicine, like, oh, let's harvest as much of this Japanese knotweed as we can.
Ah,
And really thinking about like our reciprocal role in both gaining medicine from the land and giving back. And I
mhm.
have been able to teach all kinds of permaculture through that. So it's taken me a while to figure out my local community because some of those more traditional, I would say like permaculture things were just not, it's just like I couldn't generate any interest and nobody seemed to really understand what it was or care. But when I found the angle into health, that was like suddenly people were like, oh, okay, So the herbalism has been a great way to teach regenerative ag, actually, and like reciprocal relationships and seed saving and propagating native plant species. And so it's really interesting that like it's like you have to find, that audience. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, there's like a combination lock for each community where they've got their own pre-built-in worldviews, and you got to kind of find their language, the cipher to get through the wall. And
Mhm.
yeah, that's interesting. You said the plant walks because one of the things that people were asking me at that meeting I was at was, would I be willing to do plant walks? So I'm going to try to set something up where I'm going into the woods and talking about the pawpaws that are growing here and the butternuts and the ramps and stuff like that. So that'll be great.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have some open access foraging hand ethics handouts I can send you that you might be able to use.
Sure.
And I just give them out at the top, like when I always give them out at the start of my walk, and we talk about like what does it mean to start a foraging practice? Like this is not the Walmart of the forest,
Yeah.
like making sure people aren't in there pillaging with their knowledge, but actually like being like using foraging and harvesting as a reciprocal technique, which is
Mhm.
a hard shift, but it's a useful shift, and they're not going to get it in Facebook groups. But when they come to my walk, they're going to get a lot of it. You know what I mean? So,
Good.
uh,
Yeah, because that's important because I do see like here the few little patches of ramps that are left. People will often go in there and clear cut them and dig up the bulbs. They don't think of the future. So
no.
doing the honorable harvest thing that Robin Wall Kimmer talks about, and
Mhm.
I try like to talk about it if they're a sciencey group in the terms of being a keystone species as a
Mhm.
human, being the wolves like in Yellowstone, and
Yeah.
we're going to go in and interact with the place, and we're going to eat something from there. How can we interact with it where it's also enriching it for the future? Spreading some seeds, doing some
Mhm.
things like that at the same time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Okay, so anything else you want to share about your work?
Let's see. Well, I also like to do activism with regards to ecological conservation. So I'm here in the place that's probably pretty similar ecologically to the story of where you're at from what I've read, where
Mhm.
like 99% of it was clear cut maybe 150, 200 years ago.
Mhm.
And so there's only little patches of intact ecosystem left here. Um, and so I'm really trying to preserve what's left here in Ontario and also coming from out west. The background that's behind me here is old growth forest on Vancouver Island. And that
Mhm.
is, dwindling in numbers, but there are these reservoirs of not only medicine and, climate mitigating benefits that they're offering us with holding the soil together and creating a cooler atmosphere there and doing all those things, but they're also like a spiritual reservoir of knowledge and how people can connect to the earth. They're so important as a living library to be like this template of the earth's vision for health that I try to reach people on both those levels. So I talk to people who are more into the spiritual side of things about how important preserving these memories of health of Mother Earth and Creator is. And then I also talk about how, in a scientific sense, a utilitarian I can't say the word utilitarian sense, it's important to preserve these ancient forest habitats because these trees have carried the genetic memory of facing so much adverse events, climate shifts, and their seeds are the resilient ones that can go forward into the future and be able to deal with all the stuff that's ahead of us. So we have to help them to be these refugia, these reservoirs of ancient memory. And
Mhm.
so I'm trying to raise awareness about that
Mhm.
when there's corporations or governments doing exploitative things like they're doing on Vancouver Island or up north here in Ontario. There's a lot of lithium mining and cobalt mining exploration going on right now. And
Mhm.
people talk about, they use the sustainability term, the greenwashing term, but they don't look at that. What they're really talking about is a sacrifice zone, as Derek Jensen would call it. So they're gonna this place that's off the beaten trail, that's out of sight, out of mind. They don't mind that that thing gets totally decimated as long as they get their Tesla vehicle. So I'm trying to make the connection there for people that believe in permaculture ethics, let's say, earth care, but are just pushing forward with an alternative to oil without thinking about the implications
Mhm.
for some of the habitats they have to mine the resources from. So another part of my work is activism, and then getting people not just to look at the doom and gloom, but to be like an embodiment of caring for the forest locally. So not just pointing at the bad guys, but actually getting people involved in appreciating the forest. Because here, especially in Ontario, what I found is that the term generational amnesia or the shifting baseline syndrome is so prevalent, where there's lots of
Mhm.
kids here that they're born into this area that's like mostly monocultures. Uh,
Mhm.
maybe their parents didn't happen to have that much interest in the forest, so they've never even really been to the forests that are left here, the last few intact old growth. And I, coming from out west where there's still quite a bit of intact old growth forest and wilderness, I sought those places out almost immediately. And I was like, oh, beautiful, this unique habitat I've never seen before. But for them, they haven't really even had a chance to integrate their perception of beauty in that place. So they're finding beauty on these digital avenues and these
Mhm.
material things. So another part of my work is trying to get the people that are in that state of generational amnesia to remember what their ancestors did, the importance of these last few ecosystems, and to get them out there and show them, the beauty of these old trees, and get them to taste a pawpaw and think about growing their own. And that
Mhm.
kind of snaps them out of the spell of this modern coveting of digital material stuff and gets them back into the rhythm of Earth.
Yeah, wow. You said so many things, and I love the way that you framed the old growth forests and that sort of the poetry of that. Like it was really beautiful.
Thanks.
Um, yeah, okay, so let's sort of shift into talking about like we've started already talking about that, but I think I want to dig deeper, like the ways in which you actively teach and educate others. If you could give me maybe some more examples of sort of like what you do and how you do. And I mean, I really liked your metaphor of like you have to find the cipher for each community because I really have found that to be super true.
Yeah,
So I'm curious about sort of how you like think about that and how you do that. If you could give some examples.
sure. I guess at the base level, I just try to take an honest look at everything that I've learned and then an honest look in the mirror and make sure that I'm actually embodying that myself.
Mhm.
Because if you're not really embodying and living the thing that you're talking about, then people aren't going to feel it and they're not going to want to do it themselves. So
Mhm.
that takes some serious self work to do that, and then to take honest account of where you still have a lot of room for improvement. And so once I do that, then I just try to go out into the community and, like you say, reach people where they are. I try to sometimes I'll wear little shirts like this that are saying, I have to read it for the transcription. Degeneration as a line
Regeneration.
scratched
Yeah,
through it, sustainability as a line, and then regeneration on the bottom to try to get people thinking
yeah.
outside the greenwashing lines of something above and beyond. And then they ask questions and it starts a conversation. And that's just kind of a decentralized person to person thing that I do sometimes. Or I'll, at my day job, I'll bring something like pine needle tea. Oh, can we show it? There it is. And
Yeah.
I'll share some pine needle tea and some tea made of native plants, and they're like, "Wow, that's amazing! What is how'd you learn about that?" And then I tell them about the native plants that the indigenous people have cared for so many millennia, and how we can integrate those into our gardens. They create habitat for non-human beings, and I talk about the generational amnesia of how there used to be these massive trees here in on the shore of Lake Erie, like white pines, for instance, used to be over 200 feet tall. Some of the
Mhm.
records show, and
Yeah, yeah. Same here.
oh wow. And now people are like, that's 100-foot tree, is like, do they think that's the biggest tree? So I,
Mhm.
I try to do that, these little moments where I have person to person connections. And
Sorry. So spider activity happening up there. I heard some activity. I was like, what's going on? Okay, spider's having a meal.
Wow.
I'm friends with the spiders. I leave them be. They're my friends.
Oh yeah, me too. I mean, I when I was out west, I would move probably the black widows if they're in my room, but aside from
Yeah.
that, yeah. And then I also do the talks that I had mentioned. So I'll go to horticultural societies. I went to that health clinic, and I also go to like preserving groups because a lot of them too, they're still doing they understand the importance of self-sufficiency and thinking of emergency preparedness, but they haven't necessarily connected it right to the land where they live. They're buying things,
Mhm.
and maybe they don't understand, that if you're buying conventionally grown crops, they might have glyphosate on them or something like that. So I go there and I try to make the connection right back to the earth and how they can start to decentralize their access to those foods that they're preserving,
Mhm.
and get into seed saving and stuff like that. So I try to go to these groups that have like these desperate connections to food and health and try to connect them onto a more holistic vision that
Mhm.
incorporates all the way from the seed to table, like my book says,
Mhm.
and get them connected to the local ecology and excited about learning about it because that's important.
Mhm.
A lot of people try to use like doom and gloom, horrible worst case scenarios to get people motivated. And maybe it does in the short term, but I find
Yeah.
like the love and the curiosity is more of a compelling thing that really gets them going. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
lean into that as much as I can.
Yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, when I think about what motivates people to want to get out in the woods, I mean, some of it's self-sufficiency, but around here, a lot of people have like families that have the 4 or 5 generations of hunters, and they are like, wow, like what else is out here while I'm hunting? Like I see it all and I don't know any of it, you
Yeah.
know? And how do I, and so to me, it's like sort of like building knowledge and value, and then value builds care.
Yes.
Especially for like around here, we have a lot of poor people that, like it's just a really rural, like pretty despondent area in some ways. There's not like a lot of the industries aren't here anymore. And, I mean, you've read about where I live. And,
Yep.
and it's interesting how like once they realize it has value, then suddenly they care about it. And then that opens up everything, right?
Yeah.
But it's almost like you have to figure out how to make them care. Like,
Hmm.
like why do you care about this forest? Well, maybe you care about this forest because there's something in there that you want. All right, we'll start there. Like, I'll take whatever I can get if that's where we start. We end up with scattering ramp seeds, but that's not where we're going to begin.
That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes the utilitarianism is the in, and then once they get involved in the activity, they're all of a sudden find themselves in the forest, and they're seeing this connection between them and the plants, and they have the reverence moment, and then they
Yeah.
get some more understanding.
Yeah, and they start realizing that that is sort of like an ancient human thing that they've lost and that they, can get back somehow. And then then that's just sort of a beautiful journey to watch.
Yes, it is.
Speaking of journeys, I guess the other question, if you don't have anything else on teaching, is what are some of the common transformations that you see in people that you teach?
Well, one other thing I was going to mention about the teaching aspect
Mhm.
is another thread that I've noticed a lot recently is that over like the last 5 years, let's say, there's a lot of people have gotten to be aware of like there's food that's dangerous and there's certain medicines they don't want to be involved in. So they're looking
Mhm.
at alternative stories about food and about medicine. So there's
Mhm.
that crowd too, like the alternative media crowd. And I find that's a really untapped niche as far as regenerative knowledge and permaculture because a lot of them they're getting a lot of doom and gloom stuff
Mhm.
about the bad guys that are doing this, but they're not necessarily getting solutions,
Mhm.
things that they can do in their own lives on a residential scale, and things that are, peaceful and not based in like angry and hating on some bad guy. So one of
Mhm.
the really powerful connections I made with that was James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. He invited me to be on his Solutions Watch series, and
Nice.
so yeah, so I got to connect with that, and he's providing viable, like decentralized solutions where people can feel more empowered on a community scale
Mhm.
and kind of disconnect from like boycotting systems that they don't feel are serving them. And so that's been really huge because there's so many people that hadn't thought about the value of gardening and understanding the local ecology. But
Mhm.
now that they see that it helps them have the sovereignty and be able to boycott the bad guys, that's their
Mhm.
end, right? So there's that group too, and then that opened up another thing where I'm doing a radio show with people that also are really helpful in informing people about what's going on in the world. And now I'm providing like solutions based ecology info in that, so that helps too.
That's awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like you're reaching like a lot of different audiences, like pretty much whatever audience you can reach with the message, right? Yeah, I feel the same way. It's sort of like, all right, if I'll talk if you listen, you know? That's part of why me and Jonathan are doing this study because we're really interested to like talk to different people that are doing this work in the world and sort of look at the common threads to see what works. So we can create a manual for everybody else of like, okay, hey, it's all hands on deck. Like, you're doing your amazing thing in your region, but we need like a million more of you, right? So how do we help empower people to make a million more of people that are doing this kind of messaging, right?
That's great. I love it. A template for pathways to reach people. That's great.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We'll see what we get. Okay, so yeah, common transformations. What do you kind of like, what are the common transformations you might see with people that you teach?
Okay, yeah. Well, like the people at the meeting I was at the other night, a lot of them understand that they've got to get the right nutrients to get the health, but they didn't necessarily understand that they're growing right in their yard already, like these opportunistic plants, for instance. That was one of the things I covered. So shifting the perspective a little bit on people that are focusing on one part of their life,
Mhm,
helping them see that the solution's right in front of them, they all
mhm,
of a sudden feel empowered, like, wow, and I can save money. I can harvest those dandelions and help my liver, and I can,
mhm,
harvest those elderberries and strengthen my immune system that are just growing in the ditch over there. So
mhm,
the excitement of people seeing that there's already solutions right in front of them has been one of the biggest transformations that I see. And
mhm,
seeing that sparkle in their eye where they're like, wow, I'm going to get out there. And then, of course, that starts the chain reaction of identifying all the other plants. And
mhm.
so that's been a huge one.
Yeah, I actually feel like I have a similar story. I worked with a woman as an herbalist who like had these colon issues. She had like too much colon, basically. She had like 6 feet extra colon. And of course, modern medicine is like, oh, we need to cut this out of you. And she's like, I'd rather not go through major surgery. She
Yeah.
and somehow she ended up getting connected with me. And I was like, well, we have a number of local plants, including some opportunistic ones that literally go in everybody's yard that help peristalsis that can help, really, really move food through it. If you got this so, we ended up using yellow dock, which is Ruminus
Oh,
crispus, which is just like around here. I mean, it's just a weed, right? And I showed her the plant and I gave her a yellow dock tincture, which, hey, doesn't taste great, but I was like, listen, I made her a bitter blend. Just take this after meal, see what happens. And,
yeah.
she calls me back like, I don't know, it was like 2 months later. She's like, yeah, I'm not having surgery anymore. And now she like that. And she's like, yeah, I got the husband to stop spraying my yard. We've got a yellow dock patch going. And she's like, hey, can I come to one of your plant walks? And it was this really cool moment, again, going back to that utilitarian argument where she was like, it's like, I have a need. Modern medicine is giving me a really bad solution. And if I can actually just use this really local, abundant plant, which honestly, by me harvesting it helps control it so that there are other native plants that can, like that's part of the issue we have with yellow dock. Like it ends up taking space up and so much space up that others can't grow. So it's sort of like everybody wins. And now she comes to the plant walks, and it's amazing to see like somebody go from that sort of like, oh, there's something that could help me right here to, hey, I need to know more. I want to expand my view.
Hmm.
It feels like everybody everywhere could really benefit from that conversation, like all
Totally.
humans, right? Like we are part of this land and we forget that.
Yep.
Okay, so then you mentioned all these opportunities. How are you reaching people with that message? Like what are the different ways in which you do outreach?
Well, I guess let's see. I'm gonna trace back in my head where it started. It started with my permaculture class, and then I just got the idea for my book. And so I did a Kickstarter campaign. And so having my permaculture group that I went to school with, which Matt Powers has an online permaculture class, the Advanced Permaculture Student Online. So it's like a global community of people doing online versions
Mhm,
as well as physical projects. So that really helps me to network. And a lot of people were helpful in supporting on my Kickstarter campaign.
mhm, mhm,
And then from there, I decided to make a blogs because Kickstarter is you've got all the people's emails that are getting updates. And then from the blog, I could build on that knowledge that I had accumulated into my book, and I can carry that onward into the future and keep adding on. And now I'm writing on my second book, which is going to be more regenerative agroforestry focused rather
cool.
than just residential scale. So
Cool.
it started from there, and then now I've kind of branched out to trying to diversify my online presence as much as I can. And I'm not great at computers, so it's kind of a painfully
Yeah.
process. I stumble through it, but because there's a lot of weird stuff like Facebook censorship and things like that with these algorithms, so I kind of diversified out to Substack because they weren't doing the censorship, And then I've got other video platforms like Odyssey and Rumble, as well as YouTube, where I'm sharing
Mhm.
instructional information about how people can grow different native trees and plant them in guilds and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And so those are some of the main online presences. And
Mhm.
then, yeah, my written works that I'm working on.
Mhm. Cool, cool. Where did you do your PDC? Who was your you said Matt?
Yeah, that was Matt Powers.
Matt Powers. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm not familiar with him. I did mine up in Massachusetts. It's like the whole lineage of Dave Jackie Edible Forest Gardens. I learned from all of Dave Jackie's students, which is like Keith Salzberg and Kay Cafasso. They've been running. Dave retired and then they've been running his PDC since. And I ended
Wow.
up like living at an eco village for 3 weeks doing this PDC in between jobs. It was like the best time of my life because I left my old job. I didn't have any new responsibilities. It was this really unique window to go do it. Um,
Wow.
and it was just this really cool. I've been thinking about doing a second one. I have my teacher certification. And I'd like to do a second one that was like a completely different perspective. But yeah, it's such like a I don't know. It just like changed my life. Like it just completely. I feel like if I could just like get that information out to everybody, it'd be so great. Like we wouldn't have the world we had, you know?
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
Um,
connects so many dots for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just such a it's a good starting place. Like I think you're right in the sense that like it's like a foundation to build upon. It's not
Yep,
necessarily everything, but it's a place to begin and it's got a good foundation.
for sure.
Yeah, cool. Okay, how do you address people who are skeptical?
Ah, that's a good question. Um, I guess I try to do the living by example, being able to provide tangible examples in my own life.
Hmm.
So maybe that'll be in the case of giving them a pawpaw in their hand and they
Yeah.
eat this thing that I didn't have to water it or do anything with it, spray any pesticides or herbicides on it or fertilize it. I mulched it and I added some compost and they're having this flavor experience, this sensory experience
Hmm.
that maybe it overwhelms their skepticism a bit. And or maybe sometimes I'll do metrics because there's a lot of math minded people. So I can do like a gift thinking metric about saving seeds versus buying seeds from corporations and then sharing them locally and how it compounds so quickly compared to like investing in a bank account, let's say.
Hmm.
And you share with 10 people one season and they plant it in the earth's investment account and then the earth gives them this savings withdrawal of all these seeds and all this food, and they share it, and it just keeps compounding and building. And
Hmm.
they start to change this thinking that they have of they need to hoard everything for themselves in the capitalistic thinking, and they think, wow, well, there is this other economic model, this living earth that's just producing profound abundance if I could only tap into it. And it could be a utilitarian thing again. They want to, get stuff that's so expensive at the store, but then
Hmm.
once they get involved in that cycle of gifts with their neighbors and their friends and the earth, then maybe it opens their heart a bit and they want to actually make it a spiritual practice as well, a
Hmm.
reciprocal practice.
Yeah, I love that. Um, okay, that kind of answers that question. Yeah, do you have any other stories you want to share of your teaching practices concerning regeneration?
Yeah. Well, let's see. Well, it's just been really gratifying because I try to send out seeds with each one of my books, so people don't just get the information; they get this tangible expression of my work in my own garden, my own little refugia. So they get these, let's say some colorful runner beans, and they are so excited. They look at the page in the book and they see that this thing can be grown and produce so much abundance. There's recipes to create with it, and they have these two things they can put together and create something real in their lives. And so just seeing that, and I've heard back from, I think I've tallied up 25 different countries now have gotten back to me, people from that many different countries, and said, I planted your seeds and I harvested them, and my family were sharing meals together that we grew a lot of the ingredients. And they're just so excited to make it a part of their life going forward and to pass it on to their kids.
Hmm.
And so that's been like one of the most rewarding experiences of sharing my written works along with seeds, is seeing people embrace it and then scale it up and take it into their lives.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. Just like seeing the actual physical manifestation of that work, because it's like hard to write a book and
Yeah,
put it out there and you're like, boy, I hope people will like this. I hope I said something good. And actually being able to see the tangible results of that. Yeah, I love that.
yeah, it's huge.
Do you have anything else you want to share? I've reached the end of my questions. So
Oh, okay. I didn't realize. Um, well, Yeah, I'm working on my next book right now, which is I don't know if the title is going to be set in stone because it's such a long title, but it is Stacking Functions in the Garden, the
Mhm.
Kitchen, and the Food Forest: The
Nice.
Regenerative Way from Seed to Apothecary.
I love it. I love it.
So I want to tie in all the way from the climax ecosystem down to the regenerative garden, and
Mhm.
how we can take the seeds of both culture and of native ecology and blend them together seamlessly and
Mhm.
create these multi-generational food production systems like the indigenous people did here on this continent and elsewhere,
Mhm.
and create that as like a gift, a prayer for future generations that we can say we want you guys to have this,
Mhm.
and that we want to, do our part to repair what's been damaged at the time before us. So
Mhm.
that's
Please
my.
let me know when you do your Kickstarter and I will advertise as much as I can for you.
Oh, thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You know, I have had a chance to go to the Czech Republic for work a couple of times. I'm probably going to go back in September. And I do like these like weeks where I like my day job is teaching people how to write for publication and
Oh,
I like do like all this high level technical like writing for publication and dissertation writing and stuff. So I get sort of brought to these different places because they don't have anybody like me in their country, right? Um,
uh,
and one of the most interesting things that I saw in Eastern Europe, and I think it was because they were under the Soviets for so long. So, like the Czech Republic, they were basically the heavy industry of the Soviet Empire. And that meant that nobody had any food. And they were, I mean, I've never seen such a wonderfully, extraordinarily resilient, like Western culture.
mhm.
You would go, and I got to spend time with like my hosts, like at their houses, and you would go into every village in the Czech Republic like the way that they're structured is all the houses are really close together and then they have these long 2 or 3 acre plots that are like long skinny plots and every one of them has a garden and we're talking some of the most abundant like I've never seen such abundance in the United States even at like even these mature food forests that people have been creating for like 20 or 30 years because we're talking about 100 and 200-year-old villages or even longer where these people have inhabited the same space and
Wow.
all the family members and the culture allows you to stay put, right? So all the family members. So like when we were there, we went mushroom hunting in the forest, and then we were able to come back. And then of course my contact Elena, her father created a soup. He checked all the mushrooms for us, and then we were going for porcinis, and then we created the soup, and then we went to the garden and harvested all of these things, and there must have been thousands of pounds of
Wow.
food everywhere. We're talking like the whole garage has got these twisting grapevines, and there's, I don't know, 12, 15 fruit trees in every single person's backyard. And
Wow.
it was so fascinating to see I literally got to experience 4 generations of her family that were all in like this three house area where they would grow this. And just recognizing that that was completely, and it was interesting because, and I asked her, I was really fascinated by it all, of course. And I was like, well, how does this happen? And she goes, oh, well, the Soviets, we didn't have anything. So
Yeah.
everyone had to be super resilient because we had to live with nothing. So we all know how to take care of our own needs. We all know how, and we grow food because we don't trust the system. And it was
Right.
like it, and it was interesting how these external cultural forces created this cultural like abundance that just carried on and how every generation carried it on. And yeah, it was just like it really gave me a lot of hope thinking like, wow, maybe even if things get rough here, like part of the outcome. I mean, we saw that. Have you ever seen that Cuba documentary?
No, it's not.
Remember the name of it. I'll see if I can find it. It's old. It's like from like the late 90s or early 2000s, but it's somewhere on YouTube. And it basically talks about what happened to Cuba after they basically got cut off and they essentially were isolated and they turned themselves into like a permaculture paradise. Like
Wow.
Cuba lost access to fossil fuels, I want to say in the late 80s. And then in the 90s had to basically completely shift to regenerative agriculture on a countrywide scale because they
Wow.
no longer had the oil. And so it's interesting how like this is one of the things I've been thinking about given the context of my country right now. Um,
Yeah.
like how these political shifts almost invite people to reconnect with their sort of local ecosystem and what that looks like. And I think we're going to see a major resurgence in these kinds of interests
Yeah.
coming up in the United States when the social net is essentially collapsing. Or really rather, it's being torn down to be clear. But it's sort of interesting to think about like I love your idea of like thinking about the multi-generational food forest and what that looks like. And it was so cool to see that. I don't think most people who would visit the Czech Republic would have an opportunity because I was sort of in the country. I didn't speak Czech. I had people driving me around. You know what I mean? Like it was sort of a not a unique, not like a typical tourist experience, but it was really cool to sort of see how they were thinking about those food systems as like really core parts of their security, you know?
Well, that sounds like they already had a manifestation of something I just presented about, which was creating. It's like your refugia idea, but tying in cultural, so a biocultural refugia. So
Mm,
because they've got the diversity of all the crops they're growing there, and it's also a part of their multi-generational culture where they've got these traditions, they want to
yeah.
be able to be resilient without depending on these centralized systems that are oppressive. So that's something I'm trying to kind of plant the seeds for as I'm doing designs. I'm not just designing the physical structure, but I'm nudging people, inviting people, planting the seeds for them to create traditions and infuse in their own cultural systems into those, because that's what really carries it forward.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, as the what was it, the Brehon people in Ireland, they said they wrapped their culture in a thread of poetry, you know,
Mhm.
into the old bardic rhymes and whatnot, so they
Yeah,
could carry
yeah.
it forward. So
Mhm.
that's what I want to get people into developing their own traditions that are place based and really getting into that connection with the land there where they live.
Yeah.
That can be passed on to the next generation because they really see the value in it. You're not just saying you got to
Yeah.
do this; they see all the joy in it and they want to be part of it.
Yeah, and it kind of blows my mind. Like I live in the Appalachian Mountains, you know, and traditionally there was so much really interesting land-based folk culture here that has just been completely destroyed in the last couple of generations. So like I don't there's maybe three or four of us in my whole county that sugar, which really
Well,
like why? There are literally maple trees everywhere, you know, and that maybe a little north of us there's more of a tradition, but it's interesting how like I know these traditions existed because I can look at historical documents and I can read the histories of our region and see all these things that used to happen and then they just don't anymore, and they've all been lost in like the last 50 or 75 years, and trying to bring them back and trying to really think about like how do we, you know, so like how do I invite a bunch of people over and show them how to maple sugar, and then maybe more sugar bushes will pop up, and well, we're gonna sugar on Monday and it'll be a big party and everybody come over, we'll bring food and people will carve spoons, you know, it's
oh, nice.
like this whole like thing. And I ask people to like bring something that they can share with the group, and I'm gonna try to convince everybody to establish a gift economy. It's gonna be all my neighbors.
Oh,
I
that's
think
beautiful.
the time is right. I've been trying to work on it for a while, but I think with everything that's shifting in the United States, I think people are now really recognizing like, oh, maybe I need to pay attention to what's around me. And so I'm sort of hoping this whole like problem is the solution sort of situation that we can do some good work here. So we'll see. Um,
There's a lot of disturbance, and we can plant seeds in the open soil and
yeah,
they can grow.
yeah, yeah. Do you have any idea of anyone else I should talk to or any recommendations? Because I'm still gathering like different interviews for the study. So if you have anybody you can think of that would be really good to
Uh,
talk to, I'm really happy to take your recommendations.
yeah, well, I'll think about it. I actually had an idea the other day of someone, and then I forgot to write it down, but I can get back to you and for sure and give
Okay,
you.
yeah, yeah, yeah. If there's anybody you and then you want to use your real name, I assume, for the
Yep.
study. Okay. Yeah, we'll probably be collecting data for at least another couple of months. So I think it'll probably be till the fall till we start really analyzing it and putting it together. But if there's anything else that comes up in the meantime, please let me know.
Sure.
But yeah, really appreciate your time today, Gavin. It was really nice connecting, and it's nice to hear a kindred soul who's on the same wavelength, you know. And it's good to, it just gives me peace and joy to know that there's lots of people in the world doing this work, and it's nice to connect with someone else who's doing it, you know?
Likewise. Yeah, to
Yeah.
see that the arbitrary lines drawn between us by various institutions don't matter as much, that people can find the same truth regardless of where they are, and we're doing
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. And all you have to do is go outside and pay attention, you know, actually
Exactly.
observe what you see and be curious, you know, and that really is pretty much what you need, you know? All the other things help. But in the end, if all you do is go outside and start really observing and interacting, I think you learn a great deal.
I agree.
Yeah, well, thank you again. And I'll send you the link to this recording, and I'll probably do it tomorrow morning if that's okay. I'm going to go
Yeah,
out
no
for
rush.
this. I've been working all day. So thanks again, and I'll talk to you soon.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.